that you can pick up within an hour, right? And go do things, you know, just like you cannot learn how to speak French or Chinese in an hour, you have to practice, right? But one has to start somewhere, you know, so I'm very excited to see that more and more people are interested in trying out how to code. So my goal today is to show you first why coding is relevant to libraries, and then for those who want to have some more hands-on experience of what it's like to actually code, we'll dive into the more, you know, time-consuming and messier business of actually creating code ourselves. So this is the outline of what I would like to cover today, this morning. Why care about coding, right? And why is coding relevant to libraries? And what does coding, scripting, programming, these things exactly mean? Because those terms seem to be used a lot, and a lot of people ask me this question, so I think we'll cover that as well. And what would I use the coding skill for? Like, you know, it might be relevant, it might be even relevant to libraries, but what would I exactly do it if I have that skill? So we'll talk about that as well. And if you are convinced that you want to learn how to code and you want to do some of that work, what would be some of the difficulties that you might encounter and how, you know, you can overcome them during your learning process. So those are some of the things that I would like to, you know, take a look at today. So this is what we are going to talk about, and hopefully these are the things that you are interested in as well. I have a couple of questions for you actually that I would like to ask so that I have a better idea of why you are here. So let me move the slide up. So these are some of the questions that I have. So first, like, you know, at what type of library you work at, and in what area of the library service do you work at mostly? And I guess the biggest question that I have for you is, why are you interested in coding? And if you have any experience with coding, what is that? And have you ever tried to teach yourself how to code before? And if so, what did you experience, you know, through your experiences? What were some of your difficulties? So I would like to know a little bit about that, if you don't mind sharing it. So I will give you a couple minutes for you to type it into the chat window, if you don't mind.
Okay, so as Boyan said, just use the questions pane on the control panel, and just, you know, using free text, tell us a little bit about the answers to those questions, even if it is my director, my boss made me do this webinar. That's fair as well. We'll give you 2 minutes, and then I will just read through some of the responses that we get. So 2 minutes. All right, we got some responses rolling in, so I'm just going to read some of your responses. We have someone who works in an academic medical library. I've created some web pages before, HTML, CSS. I've tried to learn Java, and every time I can't get very far. I'm interested in coding as I've made a game for our students and would love to learn more. Several people say that they don't have any experience to date, but just learning more. They're understanding that coding is becoming important in many areas in libraries. I have a response here that coding is the language of the internet. I'm a cataloger at a public library. I'm learning about linked data. I found myself needing to refresh my memory on coding. Maybe a couple of you said you've taken maybe one HTML class. That's it. A common thread here, and this is one that even leading up to this webinar we talked about, somebody who works in youth services and not really knowing anything about coding but would like some basic understanding so I can interest kids. Obviously there's a big movement in school right now, so for us to have even a little bit of understanding is good. I work at a public library that is doing more and more with makey-makeys, so that's a kind of specific reason. Someone, a digital services librarian, would like to learn coding so that I can enhance our chat widget. So kind of all over the map, Boyan, but those are some of the responses that rolled in.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really terrific. So it gives me an idea of why you're interested in coding and, what kind of things you're interested in. So I think we'll have a really good time today. So thanks for sharing that. So some people want to have a basic understanding of what the coding exactly means because it seems like having that understanding will help you do a better job at work, right? And some of you might actually want to apply the knowledge in order to, do certain tasks that you weren't able to do, because you lacked that skill before. So all of those things are totally possible, and I think you have a very good idea about what you want to do once you know more about coding and what it actually implies. So let's dive in and talk about, why we should care about coding now. So I think there are several good reasons for us who work at libraries to care about coding. So there are a number of things. Here are, I think, 6 that I picked, but these are a lot, so we are going to take a look at it one by one. So the first one is an increasing emphasis on coding in the K-12 education. So like you see here in this news article, more and more people are now arguing that children should learn how to code at school. So currently it's not a part of official curriculum like English or mathematics or things like that, but more and more people are now talking about this. That means that, more emphasis are given to this subject as, part of the learning process for all the children at school. And of course, Tim Cook would say this because he's like Apple CEO, but the thing is, he's not the only one. A lot of people are coming around saying these things, so it's something for us librarians to pay attention to. Also, there are more and more organizations that are being created to push sort of the coding knowledge, the subject of computer science, to children, particularly Code.org, the organization that I'm showing you here, is one that actually is trying to broaden access to computer science to students, particularly to female and underrepresented students of color. So there is definitely a movement going on around here that we actually notice, and that's why we are paying attention to coding. And if you are a parent, you will notice summer coding camps are becoming very popular among kids. So this is something that is going to grow into sort of like a bigger trend, because these kids are now at schools, but eventually they will get into colleges, and eventually they will become adults, and then there will be a public libraries. So you can imagine that this is going to have an impact to our library services in general. Learning how to code among adults, not just amongst the children, has also become very popular in recent years as well. So some of you may remember this, but in the beginning of 2012, Code Academy, which is a startup company, started this website, the free website that offers a series of computer programming tutorials in a variety of languages on a weekly basis, and then invited anyone to join and take a year to learn how to program. And this was called Code Year. And according to the Wikipedia article where I got the statistics, over 450,000 people took courses in 2012 when this Code Year program was, going around. And as of January 2014, the site had over 24 million users who had completed over 100 million exercises. So that's a lot of people. That's a lot of time that people spend on learning how to code, right? So this shows that people in many different occupations, not only children, but adults, are using or trying to use a coding skill for their own work. So there is definitely society-wide interest growing about this subject, coding. When this Code Year program started, even Michael Bloomberg, who was the New York City mayor at the time, said he will also take the coding course. I don't know whether he actually completed it, but you can see that it had very broad appeal to many different groups of people. In 2014, President Obama has become the first president of America who has written a code, right, a piece of code. And some of you also would know that there have been a few hackathons that was organized and held at White House during his presidency as well. And journalists are starting to learn how to code in order to process and interpret data for their reporting purposes. So investigative journalism is, you know, a widely known area of specialty in journalism, and those people really need to know how to code. And there is discussion about whether coding skills should be taught at journalism majors in colleges. I don't know whether many students who, you know, get into colleges majoring in journalism would expect to learn how to code, but this is obviously the trend, and you are looking at this website that was designed to offer specifically coding tutorials for journalism students and journalists. Okay, and even real estate investors are asking if coding can benefit their businesses. So librarians are not alone in their interest in learning how to code, along with all these other groups of people. It has been disbanded now, but for a while also there has been a code year interest group that belonged to like ALA. And some educators argue that coding is now the new literacy expected of everyone. And since we are surrounded by all kinds of software on our phone, computer, electronics, cars, etc., in today's world, knowing how everyday software does what it does seems to be pretty important. So we can appreciate the point of view like this, right? And education is one of the library's important missions, and more people are interested in learning how to code, so it makes sense that libraries should pay attention to this subject as well. Also, if you work at academic libraries, you will know that programming is also becoming more and more widely adopted across many different disciplines in academia, including humanities. So in humanities, coding skills are applied to pioneer the new area called digital humanities, and I'm sure some of you have heard this term before. And scientists are even more actively learning how to code these days to facilitate their research. So software carpentry, this group that I'm showing you right here, provides basic coding skills designed to be useful to research scientists working at a lab setting. Let me see, I'm having a little difficulty controlling the, oops, okay. Sorry about that. Okay, gotcha. All right. And college students are also more and more interested in coding. They like to organize hackathons that run for 1 or more days. And this is a hackathon that has been held at Johns Hopkins University last year. And even libraries are organizing hackathons as well. So this webpage shows the hackathon recently organized by University of Notre Dame's Habsburg Libraries. So libraries are, participating in this trend of, growing interest in coding. So they organize hackathons. Some of the libraries start offering coding classes. Maker spaces are one of the places where these kind of like, coding workshops take place often. So definitely there's a room for libraries to play in this area. So we have seen so far that definitely there is a growing interest in coding in our society, but why is coding relevant to libraries? So hopefully you are convinced by now that, okay, coding is relevant, somewhat, but you might want to see the reason why it is specifically relevant to libraries. So there are a few reasons I can think of, and those are roughly these. So it will give you a better understanding of information systems and applications that we deal with every day as librarians and library staff. It would help us improve communication and collaboration with IT. it would let us participate in development projects, of building various web applications and other websites and things like that as a partner rather than a client who is simply asking for a product. And it will also allow us to do some custom design or even development for our own libraries when we see a need for it. So for example, if you have a basic understanding about how code in general works, it will be very easy to see and explain why at some computers this eGournal website displays full text, whereas some other places it does not, and instead asks people to purchase the article by paying $30, right? So the reason is because this website is dynamic, right? So it will display you this kind of information on this page if you are accessing this page from a computer that does not belong to a certain IP range that that server keeps, right? So if your IP address matches, then it will actually show you the page that includes the full text, so you will go right through it. But if you are not in that IP range, you will get to see this page instead that asks you to purchase, the article. So this is a very simple example in which your understanding of how coding works can actually benefit your work as, work at a library, because you can explain better and you can understand better how various, information systems and applications that we deal with every day at libraries work. And if you are able to code or can communicate with the IT staff better based upon your understanding of programming, then you can also improve communication with IT and strengthen collaboration with them, right? So if you can do that, then you can specify what you want in clearer terms. So for example, you want to provide better access to the databases that the library offers. You might want to have a custom page that is dynamic and, allows people to search. If you know how to code, you can generate these things yourselves, or you can work together very well with either your library's IT or even the vendor IT in order to get something like this to be in place at your place. And you might be able to also customize the discovery layer that you use at your library, right? So this is AppsCode discovery layer. And you can see that it has been customized in a certain way. And you can see on the left-hand side, it has a number of facets and the limit. And those things you can definitely change and customize, and there is a backend where the code actually is stored to make that happen. So if you understand the code, you can do some of the work yourself, or even if you are unable to do so, if you know how this exactly works and the result is generated and displayed, then there's definitely more room for you to actually work with the people who can actually change those codes to specify exactly how you'd like that to be displayed on this system that will serve the library patrons. And how many times have you, wondered how wonderful it would be if you can customize your library's LibGuides, right? And this Loyola University at Chicago has a customized LibGuide system that you can see that works really well. So if you want to do some of these things, and if you have coding skills, this is totally within your reach to do so. And you may be able to customize other things, such as, your interlibrary loan system, right? So this is Atlas Iliad system, that is a third-party vendor system, right? And we customize it so it doesn't look like this out of the box, but if you know the basic coding, then you can change things the way that you'd like it so that you know that the library patrons would have a better use of it. And if you have a course reserves system, for example, that we use at our library, it might not be responsive, but nowadays we all know that people expect it to work well on a mobile device, so you can take up the task of making it responsive, or at least you know how it works. Then it gives you leverage to talk to the vendor asking for this to, be an improvement that they can work on, next time. So there is definitely some power that is given to you with the understanding of how the coding works in general. And, it's a little more ambitious, but if you know how to code, you can even go ahead and customize your library catalog. A lot of times we have library catalog that is very tightly controlled by the vendor, who designs and maintains the system. But, coding skills allow you to change the look and feel, as well as some of the functionalities. So the University of Toronto Libraries has done that, and the result is really beautiful. So it's not only, responsive, meaning very user-friendly on mobile devices, but it also includes various types of information that is really useful for patrons. And we know that's better than, IT people. So if you have some IT skills, it will actually translate into better user experience for your library patrons as well. So that's why there is a group of library people talking about just coding in places like Code Believe. So clearly, coding is one area of specialization in librarianship, and if you are interested in this, definitely this is one of the groups that you would want to keep an eye out. If you know how to code, you might want to offer a new service. So for example, would you want to allow people to pay library fines online? And if you know how to code, or at least you have a basic understanding of how coding works, you can make that happen, right? You can even build one, or you can ask, or at least you have an idea that is possible, right? So this will, again, result in better experience for your library patrons. You may be able to develop or co-develop with the IT staff, a custom application. So this is a faculty bibliography that I have built in the past, and that was because the school wasn't able to purchase a system like this, but they needed one. So we knew what was needed, and we had specifications, and somebody had coding skills, so I was able to actually create one, which was very useful at the time for the people who needed it, right? And if a new service such as 3D printing is going to be launched at your library, then you will definitely need some sort of online form to get the 3D printing job. So how are you going to, exactly handle that? And if you know how to code, you can, come up with some sort of online submission form that will help your patron to submit the job relatively easily. And also you can always create a back-end application that will help your library staff to, administer and manage the job from the point in which people will submit the job to, actually printing, paying for it, and then actually picking up. So if you have a basic understanding of how coding works, there are a lot of possibilities for you to come up with, ideas that will improve your work and your colleagues' work at libraries. Just to think about all those applications that you might be able to build that will make people's work easier and more efficient. And you can be the one who comes up with those ideas, and you can be the one who either build or partner with the IT to build them. So if you know how to code, I think that skill will translate into a lot of benefits at your libraries. You can also use your coding skills to create a unique promotional event, such as this Instagram contest that was run by NCSU libraries. So this is a promotional event that they had on your library building, so they wanted to promote it further. People were tagging Hunter Library in Instagram, taking a lot of photos of the new building. So they wanted to make it a contest, so they built this custom application that works with the Instagram app API. So now people can, battle sort of, which one is the better photo. So I like the third photo, I will pick that one, or I will pick this one, and then the winner will get the award. But the result is more promotion about the new library building, which you can do if you have some coding skills. You can also use existing library data and apply your coding skills to that. So we know that libraries collect a lot of data, right? But not always what it means is clear. And if you can visualize it, if you can manipulate the data programmatically, you might be able to find more useful information out of that. So for example, this graph shows when our information services desk at the library is most popular. And when we charted the data, this way we were able to figure out pretty quickly that the time is Thursday, right? So on the x-axis, 0 is Sunday, so Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And the time of the day when that desk is getting most requests from patrons is around 8 p.m., 9 p.m., things like that. So if you have data and you have some coding skills that can actually manipulate the data, then you can get a lot of insight out of the data that is usually just stored in Excel spreadsheets, and you look through it, but it doesn't necessarily mean much to you. Also, you can do things like which school borrows most articles through the interlibrary loan service. So the same way you can visualize the data, and then you can easily tell in our university, for example, the largest portion of the interlibrary loan request comes from school of medicine, and that might help you to strategize what you want to do about that. Another data point that we visualized in order to see, if we can gain any new insight is, ebooks. So some ebooks are requested but denied the request. So this data come from our discovery layer through which people access our ebook collection. And so we were able to find out some of the ebooks that we do not currently have, but probably would be good to purchase because they are obviously on demand by our patrons. In a similar way, there are some databases that people try to get in, but they get turned away because the seats were filled out. Right? So in those cases, we know that, okay, so there's a lot of demand for these databases. We want to take a look at it to see if we can add additional user seats. So things like that can really help your work at the libraries. So we have seen so far why we should care about programming and how programming, coding, scripting is relevant to libraries, right? So people use these terms kind of in a way that is very interchangeable. They use sometimes coding, sometimes they say scripting, sometimes programming. It can be kind of confusing if you're new to the subject. So I get this question a lot, so let's kind of take a look at it. So the thing is, not everything technical is coding, right? So here are a bunch of acronyms. They all relate to various technologies on the web, but not all of them are related to coding. So for example, you will notice things like HTML, CSS, XML, those are markup languages. They are not necessarily programming languages. There is a difference between markup and programming. So markup language dictates how the content of a web page should be marked up so that a web browser can understand how to display it. So on the left-hand side, if you know some of the HTML, you'll recognize this as HTML code, and the browser sees this, computer understands this as the language that they can interpret, and then they will translate it and display this to humans, as a result, right? So you can see that the content does not exactly change, it just is marked up in a certain way, so the computer knows that, okay, so coffee, tea, Coca-Cola should be, displayed with a bullet, and it will be like, a circle, and the next list would have square bullet, things like that. Markup language does not really manipulate the data itself. So XML is another example of such markup language. You can, format the data in a way using, for example, like XML format, but that doesn't really change the content itself. In contrast to markup language, programming language does something a little different, right? So people sometimes ask things like knowing how to use a CMS, content management system like WordPress or Drupal, does that count as, coding, Or, if I know how to edit HTML or CSS or XML, does that count coding? I mean, in a sense, you can say it is because it's still dealing with the language that the computer understands. So you are editing that so that the computer can get that instruction. So in a sense, you can say that it's coding, but it doesn't actually manipulate data itself. It's just marking up so that it can be displayed in a web browser or things like that. So if you're just dealing with the markup part, such as HTML and CSS, it would count more like web design knowledge, necessarily a coding skill. But if you are actually writing things in JavaScript or PHP or R, which are programming languages, then that would count more as, actual coding work. So that's the difference, basically. So programming is knowing and writing the logic for a computer to execute in a programming language that a computer understands. So you will have conditions. You will have like looping. You will have a certain data. You will feed it through these control structures, and then you will get something out of it. That would be more like coding, programming, scripting. Right? So this is an example of a code that is not a markup. It is an instruction to a computer using some kind of logic, right? So, some of you may understand what this means, some of you may not, and that's not a problem. But basically what is written here is an array, which is a collection of, things, items, right? And then the next line is sort of like a for loop. So it actually goes through this collection and asks the computer to do something specific to each item, and then you're spitting it out. So things like this will be done by programming languages. Markup languages wouldn't be able to do this. So that's basically the difference through example that you can understand better. So if you run this, for example, JavaScript, in this JS-Biro website, you will get the output that is shown on the right. So that's what is happening. So you can see that the difference when you run an HTML code and the content displayed, and actually you run a code that does some sort of data processing, and then turns out certain results like this. So there is some sort of difference. This is another example of the same code run in Python. So you can also appreciate that they are doing the same things, but in different programming languages they are using slightly different notations. So you can see that here they're using square brackets, but then they say for I in A print. Here they say something different for, and then document.write. So you see that the syntax is a little different, right? And those things are going to trip up, but that's the sort of feature of programming languages that you need to get used to if you learn how to code. So programming enables the dynamic manipulation and transformation of the input. And the difference between coding, scripting, programming is not that great, but usually the term coding refers to the knowledge of a programming language, not a markup language. So there's that difference. So if somebody says, I'm a developer, that means that they run, programming language code. And if somebody says I'm a web designer, that person would work with more like HTML, CSS, things like that. So there's that difference. Code and scripts are also generally much smaller than a full-blown program. So if you look at actually the source code of a huge program like Microsoft Word or Microsoft PowerPoint, people wouldn't really call that script, right? Because it's huge. It's like a big program. But if I write a short code that has like 10 lines or something, and it will do something to my file and change the output, I would call them my code, that this is my script that I wrote, things like that. So that's how people use these terms. Here I will use all of these terms kind of loosely, so I will say coding, programming, scripting in a very interchangeable manner. And if you are interested in learning more about the difference between scripting and programming, there are some people who passionately argue about this. So here are some links that you can actually go to and read about it if that's sort of like your thing. So far we have covered why we should care about coding and why coding is relevant to libraries, and we also, talked about what you can do once you know a little bit of coding at libraries, right? So, okay, that sounds all good, but some of you may say, well, but I don't really do anything related to coding. I'm not a web librarian, I'm not a systems librarian, so even if coding has a place in libraries, I just don't see my role in it. Like, I just don't see why they would be relevant to me. And that's a very legitimate question, so I want to talk about that as well. So I'm going to give you an example of what happened in my workplace in which I could use my coding skill. So this is a tiny, tiny Python script. So again, like, I would call this script rather than a program because it has like 9 lines, right? And this script does very simple things. So why I created the script and what I did it is an interesting story. So I got this huge file from my library's reference account, which had a lot of bibliographic information. And I got it as a tab delimited text file. I exported it from reference, so I got this right like this, and it was all good. But what I needed to do was adding a column in front of it because I needed that. I needed to import it into local SQL database. So, in order to get that into my SQL database, I needed a column in front to put the ID in there. That sounds like pretty simple, so I opened it up in Excel and I just added a column. And so there you go. I should be all done. And then when I opened it up in a text editor, I saw that Excel totally messed the things up. Like, there is no column in front first, and now they have these weird, like, quotation marks that would totally screw up the tab limited, format that the file originally had. So I couldn't use Excel for this purpose. So what do? There are like 10,000 records. I could manually enter tab key in front of each record, but then I will be doing this like 10,000 times. It's not going to happen, right? So that's why I wrote the script so that, the computer can do this for me instead of me doing it. So the Python script basically asks to read a file one line at a time, and then it inserts a tab in front of each line. And then it writes that into a new file. So I get a new file at the end of this script running completely. Then that resulting file is just exactly how I want it, that it has a tab in the front of each line, and now it's beautiful. So it's ready to go into my MySQL database, and I don't have to do this like 10,000 times. So I thought it was totally worth it, right? So this is one way in which you can automate some of the tedious, repetitive work at your workplace, to make it better. And I know that, spreadsheet is everywhere at libraries. We all deal with lots of data. There are certain things that we just do because we have to do it, but it's like very repetitive, very tedious. If you have a little bit of coding skills, sometimes you can automate those things. And to me, that's like, one of the greatest benefits of knowing how to code. Also, another example. So you might think that, okay, so that was just some text files, it's not that glamorous, it's not that shiny, but what about, a full text article that everybody wants to get? We all have these patrons who, go to the, journal website and they find this article that they want and they can get to it. So they say, why doesn't the library have one? I need this, I want that article. And what happens is that they just don't go through the library, right? So if they go through the library, they actually click the journal in the library website, then they will, go through the library proxies. They will be authenticated, so they will be able to get to the full text. But a lot of people completely skip this step and they just complain, like, I can't get the article. And then they are very sad, right? And then they come to the library and we help them. But what if we can provide some sort of tool to help them? So that's why I created this Easy Proxy bookmark class. So this basically works like a little bookmark. So using this tool, what you can do is you enter the bookmark title, and then each library has a specific easy proxy prefix. So you add those things and you get a little code, and that code will display a link that you can drag into the bookmark toolbar on your web page, on your web browser. And once you have that bookmark up there, you can ask patrons who are having these issues, go to that web page and then click this bookmark. Then it will ask people to log in through the library proxy, and then they will be able to get the article like magic, like this. So you will see that there is this bookmark right up there on top of the screen that is written as a full text via HSL. So if you were in the previous screen asking for you to pay for the article, you can click this bookmark and then it will ask you to log in, and now you can get the article. So this is like a magic. So it's something that you can do in order to make your patrons' lives a little easy. It makes a big impact. When I created this, I know that many library users really like that. So if you're interested in this particular code that I created, you can read about this, but basically that's another example of how you can use your coding skill for. So you don't have to necessarily be a systems librarian or web services librarian. If you are, then coding skills will be definitely very handy for you, but there are many problems that we kind of like encounter at libraries, and in order to solve a problem, many occasions you will find that the coding skill will come very, very handy for you. So this I showed you before is a custom web application that I built, I think like 4 years ago probably, based upon the faculty publications data that the library had that was stored in the library's RefWorks account. So once I built it, you can search, articles, you can search, faculty members by name, you can search faculty and their publications by department, you can also search by ID, like article ID or faculty ID, things like that. So this is an example of programming because you can dynamically display different types of information that you hold in a system, right? So this is a search results screen. So you search for long, and then you will display all the articles that matches this keyword. You can look at different people in a certain department. You can also create a new article record. And what happened is, again, programming is solving a problem. So initially, I had this page for my coworkers to enter the data. So new faculty publication comes in, then they will input the data in here in order to create a entry in the database, and then it will be displayed in the application. And then one of my colleagues said, but this is really tedious, and the record already is in the PubMed because PubMed has everything already. So why can't we just enter the PubMed ID, and can you just make it somehow magically that the data is pulled into so that we don't have to type all of these things in? And also this way, the various typos and errors, that kind of things can be prevented. So that was a good idea, right? So it gave me another opportunity to look into this and improve and add a new feature. So if you have a basic understanding of coding, a lot of problems when you encounter, you can see how you can actually solve the problem or make it better by applying, coding skills to it. So there are definitely a lot of opportunities for you to apply coding skills once you have a little bit of it in order to make the library work more interesting. So this is how I did it. So now, people are much happier because we have this solution. So I want to wrap up this webinar by giving you a little bit of tips and resources. So learning how to code has a lot of benefits, so hopefully you have seen some of those and you are interested in pursuing further, because I really believe that coding gives you great advantage in your library work. Computers are ubiquitous and we all use them for work. But learning how to code does not have to result in you becoming an expert or a full-time coder. So it is best if you can identify your goal in learning how to code. So what do you exactly want to do once you know how to code? That will really help you, figure out how you should approach your learning process in general. So Understanding how computer code works will help you navigate everyday information landscape. You will understand how software systems are built, function, and maintained. And if that is your goal in learning how to code, that's really great. But on the other hand, you might want to go all the way and transform library systems with APIs and build mashups applications. That's also great. But you just need to know what it is that you're shooting for, and you can always change that. Right? So some of the tips that I want to give you is that coding is like learning a language. So you have to practice, and you have to practice a lot. You think about that, it's not going to make you a better coder or good at coding, right? But when you try to practice and try to do all these exercises, you might get a little bit discouraged or frustrated because there are going to be a lot of errors. But you have to be very persistent and realistic. And in the afternoon, if some of you try coding with me, you will see what this means, because things like you forgot a comma, or you forgot a semicolon, or you had a typo, it's going to totally mess things up, and it's not going to work, and you won't be able to catch it, and you're going to go nuts. So you have to be very persistent and very realistic. And I would like you to set small goals that solve real-life problems. A lot of times, in my case at least, I had a problem first, and then I wanted to solve that problem, so I go out and research what I need to learn, right? And then I build something and fixes it, and that works better for me to learn something, because it gives me, strong motivation for me to learn something. If I don't know what the purpose of learning this thing is, then I am not going to be very motivated, and even if I learn it, I might quickly forget it. If you are interested in learning how to code, forming or joining a study group, and finding like-minded people will be very helpful. And if you create some code, it's great making sure that you comment on it and document it, because, after a while you might forget about it. We all work at libraries, so we have a lot of work that is not coding. So it is totally normal that you forget, what you have learned, and you have to repeat it. So if you have some documentations, it will really help you go back to where you were without wasting a lot of time recreating what you have already created. So some of the common obstacles that you might encounter if you embark on learning how to code, a lot of it can be very tedious. Once you have built something, or if you see something that has been programmed and working how beautifully, it can be very exciting. But creating that can be really boring work, and you have to pay attention to the syntax, and you will spend a lot of time on debugging, finding out what is wrong with the code, than actually code writing. So that's another part that a lot of people do not necessarily anticipate. And the learning curve can be a little slow. We all do not have enough time for intensive learning, but if you can create a clear connection between your library work and learning how to code, then you might make faster, progress than some of the other people. And we have life events, so sometimes things happen and you just fall off the wagon, and you just have to get back to it when you can. And it's not a big deal. So this graph describes why learning to code is so very hard. And you can see that the phase 1 and 2 is particularly interesting, because the first phase, you get really excited. You learn these all new things, and it seems like you're, getting really better, super, excited. And then after a certain point, you get to this cliff of confusion, and you're losing confidence, because there's just so much more that you don't know, and you are just realizing now that you have learned a little bit. So a lot of times people say, well, I want to, create something beautiful, right? So they shoot for drawing on an owl. But all the tutorials, all the resources they can find show them how to draw 2 circles. It's just not enough to draw an owl. But you need to know how to draw circles first before being able to draw an owl. And it's a very commonly, encountered problem. And that's why we say you need to be persistent, and you have to just keep going. So there are many resources if you look for like coding skills, things like that. Here are some, but there are lots more. But what is really important is to pick one and actually doing it. Just thinking about, oh, maybe this one is better, that might be more useful, does not help. So you have to just pick one and actually sit down and do it every day a little bit, and then that's the only way to make a progress. And always, if you are trying to code, you just change the stuff and see what happens. There's a lot of code out there online, so you kind of like download those codes and, change a little bit, see what happens. That works really well. If you are motivated, I would totally recommend this approach. So for the afternoon workshop, we'll do some of actually, creating code and see how it works. So if you are doing that, then I have this link for you to go to and then actually set up your computer. It doesn't require a lot of setup. You basically need a computer with internet access, which you already have, and you need either a Firefox or Chrome web browser, and we'll go through what it needed to be done before you run some JavaScript on it. So, just check it out before the afternoon workshop. And that's pretty much all I have. So I have some time for questions. So if you guys have.
Okay, thank you, Boyan. A lot of good information, good examples. I will, after the webinar ends in a few minutes, I will send that link again to everybody just so you have it. We have a couple hours before the next webinar begins. Only time for a couple questions, I think, so we can wrap up on time. But one, Boyan, that came in earlier was a question related to actually recruitment. And we could use your institution as an example, or just maybe your awareness of other academic libraries or public libraries. Do you have a sense that programming experience, scripting, coding, whatever you want to call it, is being asked for as like a job requirement or something that employees at libraries are looking for? Have you heard of that?
I guess it will differ from position to position. So if somebody is going to be a children's librarian, that expectation will be different for someone who is going to work as a systems librarian, right? And if someone is a reference librarian, that might be also different if that reference librarian is going to be a liaison for like physics or computer science, maybe more so than someone who is going to be a liaison for humanities. But my general sense is that the more knowledge in this area someone has, the more competitive that person is going to be, because the knowledge of coding easily translates into many benefits in library work, because we deal with library systems, library websites, and a lot of things that have to do with information. And information systems and information applications, those are all written as a code, and they run on a machine, right? So knowing how that works really helps you to be a better librarian. So the general understanding of that just makes you more competitive, like you are a more competent library person because of what you know. In terms of requirements, I would probably say that they would be more like required for like emerging technologies librarians, systems librarians for sure, web services librarians, maybe someone who would run like makerspace if they want to do some programming on coding related topics. But I think it slowly changes to include more and more. So maybe not requirement, but probably preferred conditions on job postings, things like that. I don't know whether that helps.
Yeah, yep. That makes sense. The other question really just was asking earlier on about any resources you'd recommend, which you did show on a slide towards the end there. So I think that will allow us to wrap up. So again, I will send that link out, just an email form, so you have it. We will, for those of you that want to join us for the afternoon session, that is going to begin at 1 o'clock. And Boyan, thank you for this first session. Thank you all for your participation, and we hope to see many of you for the afternoon session. Thank you.
Thank you.